Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, your one-stop shop for exploring the connections between fitness, health, and overall well-being. Join us as we dive deep into all aspects of a balanced and vibrant life, from pushing your limits in the gym to finding peace of mind outside of it. Whether you're a seasoned athlete or just starting your journey, you are in the right place to discover the knowledge and insight to perfect your fitness life.
All right, welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast. Today we are going into a burning topic in the field of health science. For many years, we have known that athletes and non-athletes have used drugs to help increase performance, whether it's on the field or whether it's playing an instrument. Many people just look at performance-enhancing drugs are used by athletes to help recover, to help perform, to help be the best athlete. Some think it's cheating, some don't. But we're honored to have a guest who wrote a book called In Defense of Doping, and to hear his position on why some athletes might use performance-enhancing drugs and the science behind performance-enhancing drugs, because it's in sports, it's in this world we live in. People have used them, people are going to continue to use them, and people need to know more about them. Alexander Hutchinson has worked in this field for a long time. He was editor-in-chief of Journal of Cellular Physiology, is currently editor-in-chief of Current Protocols. So he understands the physiology, the biology, the ins and outs of human mechanics, what these drugs are going to do to the body. So he took a stance and he wrote his book In Defense of Doping. So on this episode, we're going to dive into the book of In Defense of Doping, his thoughts on doping, where doping in this world is leading, and the sides of doping that non-athletes are using today to enhance their fitness, to enhance their quality of life.
It's pretty busy today. I recently took over a new journal, and it's just a huge journal. So finishing off what I was doing in my previous journal, because we just had a special issue come out today, and then continuing the work with the new journal is just a lot. But
and is this the Journal of Cellular Physiology, or is this a newer one?
That's the one that I just left. So I got a promotion.
Okay.
They gave me another journal that needed to be restarted effectively. So that one's called Current Protocols. And it's unlike most journals where they actually have an editorial board. Like, I mean, you're when you're in NSC shirt. So I was on the editorial board for General Strength and Conditioning Research for years. I still am. But by and large, those are names that are on a website in general, not for all journals, but certainly in general. But for this particular journal with Current Protocols, I mean, our editorial board does a lot of work, which means I have to keep after them. So that's 72 people I've got to keep track of on a regular basis. It gets busy for sure.
A lot of research being done in that journal.
Tons. I mean, Current Protocols, I mean, they are doing research, but what they publish are the actual methods that they use to get the results that they're getting. So they share those with the entire world so everybody else can continue on this research. Because as you know, I mean, science is not science until it's been done a couple of times and you can confirm results. So when people are new to the field and they need to get some additional data or new data, it's hard to actually come up with the protocols yourself because you're just having to reinvent the wheel effectively. So you can get someone else to show you what they've already optimized, all the better. It saves a ton of time for new researchers. I used this when I was coming up. It's a great product.
You would assume it's got to be great because you look at a lot of the old research and the old books, and I love them. I still read them, but that stuff's very outdated now. It's so depending on some aspects of the research, and it's good that these protocols are in place so people can expand on them if they need to. Absolutely. Or increase the whatever, it could be time, duration, the dosage on some of this stuff to review and be like, hey, did some of this miss the boat back then because we didn't look at other things?
It's possible. Usually what we see is the stuff that's classic. those results are going to be the exact same however you get to the end result. What we're getting now is that the technology has improved so dramatically that you can do it in a much faster time frame. You can use fewer subjects, you can use fewer animals, you can use less cell culture, all those things. And so what we're really doing is we're making it so that we get higher throughput. And then also, because of the fact that we can use fewer subjects, either being human or animal, they're more ethical as well, because we just don't need to use them as much. We have these things that are called organs on a chip now, which makes it so that we can effectively do an entire research study on an organ that's been generated on a chip. And so it makes it so that you don't have to do animal research, which is hopefully what we will end up in the future, where we're not going to do any animal research. We'll just generate our own organs on a chip and test those instead, particularly for drug studies.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that will help the time frame of it too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So you went from the Journal of Cellular Physiology, which, I mean, for most people, that is probably a snooze fest, but I would assume people like us were diving into the physiology of things. We're like, hell, this is pretty cool stuff. What did that kind of really entail or dive into?
I mean, so my area is going to be more organismal. So I like to see what's happening on the entire organismal level, like you would do is for an SCA. We want to see what's happening with the entire athlete. But in this case, what we're looking at is how do each of the individual cells function within the body. And there's tons of different kinds of cells. And so the amount of science that you can generate within any organism, but certainly within a human, is enormous. And there's new things that are being discovered every day. The pace of discovery is just incredible. And so that's really what JCP was looking at specifically. So there was a number of times where we got great studies, particularly in stuff like traditional Chinese medicine, that I would have to reject those papers and send them to another journal that we have, because in those cases, what they're really testing is the drug. They're testing the nutraceutical, and they're not really looking at how does the cell itself function by itself. They're manipulating the cell. So what we're strictly focused on in JCP is how do the cells function all by themselves? And it is absolutely fascinating work. Some of the stuff that people come up with in terms of what they test and what they discover, they have a mind that works in a different way than mine does. Let's just say it that way.
Yeah, they're into that stuff. Like
yes. It's not just that they're into it, because I'm into it, but I would never conceive of these things up front. They have a mind that they see it before it's actually there.
Yeah. And they can, like,
the best part.
They project some of the stuff, and they're like thinking about it while they're not even thinking about it. We all know those people in our lives. You're like, damn, like, how did that person think of that? No,
you and I could do that in terms of coaching all the time, because that's what we do.
That's our world.
And I was a good scientist, but I wasn't a great scientist. So I'm much better at the administrative end of things, recruiting papers in, making relationships with researchers so they'll submit their papers to us. Those are the kinds of things I do best.
Nice. Now, did that lead you into your book?
No.
Or you're into your topic? So I want to kind of bridge that in, because I've never heard of this book until your rep sent this over. I'm like, holy smokes, this is quite the title, In Defense of Doping. And I've asked a lot of people what they thought of that title. And a lot of people, like, they give me that death stare, like, what do you mean in defense of doping? And this is a topic that I always love to dive into, from the performance enhancement world, the supplement world. Like, what do people think are PEDs? What don't? But what brought you into that realm of writing this book of, hey, we're going to talk about this subject that most people think is like, oh, it's really bad, or they don't want to admit that a lot of athletes actually do it?
So I started off in that camp. When I first started really paying attention to what doping meant was when I was watching the Tour de France in the late 90s and early 2000s, specifically Lance Armstrong. My first sport of choice was cycling way back in the day. So in the mid to late 80s, that's when I was really getting into it. But it was just logistically difficult to do, because there just aren't a lot of races in the middle of Houston, Texas. So you always had to drive way out somewhere. It was just easier for me to switch over and do swimming instead, because I was right next door. Otherwise, I would have stuck with it for a long period of time. So I was a Tour de France junkie. I love everything cycling. And so this was 99 when he won his first tour. And then the rumor mill started shortly thereafter about what Lance Armstrong must be doing for all the reasons that we've all heard. At that point, I had just started my master's degree at Texas A&M. And I was just starting to really learn the science of it. But it wasn't until 2003 when I went back to get my PhD at University of Houston that I really started to learn at a different level, because now I was doing research design, and you start understanding the difference and just the differences of what can be done with a drug versus not. And then also the reasons why athletes are really taking them. By and large, performance enhancement is definitely there. They definitely want to find a way to perform better. But the majority of things that people are taking are for the purposes of recovery. Either it's just recovery between stages of a race, between training sessions, or after an injury. And so they're not necessarily trying to enhance their performance. They're just trying to make it so it doesn't decrease as much as it would otherwise. And then you don't really get a good sense as to what it is. I mean, I was a pretty good collegiate swimmer. I won 2 national titles in 95 and 96 with the University of Puget Sound. And I swam for several years thereafter. I competed at triathlon at a high level. I boxed. I did Olympic lifting. All those things I did at a level that made it so I understood what it was like to put your body through that kind of hell, but not until you really see it up close and personal when it comes to something like the Tour de France. A 3-week race that covers over 2,000 miles around the perimeter of France, which is effectively the size of Texas, going up and down the steepest mountains you can imagine, flying down the back end on what are effectively goat courts. I mean, these are really narrow roads that are not very good. All kinds of weather conditions. Until the early 90s, they didn't even require a helmet. So a very dangerous sport and very physically demanding. Then at that point, I started thinking, it's no surprise at all that these athletes are going to turn from time to time to pharmaceutical assistance just to get out of bed to get on their bike the next day. And as that progressed, you started to learn more and more about the different drugs that people were taking. And I started to change my position on what it meant to be doping per se. It's an umbrella term that's used to cover all sorts of evils, but also a lot of just normal goods that most of us will do in our lives for our everyday occupations. But when it comes to athletics, we have a very specific idea in terms of what it means, not just to do it, but what the ramifications of that should be in terms of punishment. And that's really where my mind started to shift away from this. I was working with a number of different athletes from a number of different sports and seeing the kinds of injuries that they would come back with and what they would have to do to get themselves either to stay on the field or to get back in the field at their best that they could be. And in most instances, you really could not accomplish this with anything else other than some drugs that were on the banned list. Now, to be sure, at no point in my career have I ever advocated for an athlete to cheat by taking drugs that were against the rules of their respective sport, nor have I ever offered or given them anything at all. But I understand completely why they would need to turn to that in order to maintain their livelihoods. So, as an answer to your question, how did I get into this? It's a long progression of a thought change over time. Changing people's minds usually takes empirical evidence, data, or personal experience that they didn't have prior. And in this case, it was not an overnight thing. It took some time. And then by the time I came up with the idea that I wanted to write this book, which is in 2021, it took me 2 years to finally get it complete before I was really ready to start shopping it around to some publishers.
Yeah, and it's one of those. I like the title you picked because you're kind of putting someone against their beliefs and what they might not know, and they have to read to find out what the insight is. Because a lot of times, and we work with a lot of athletes, and you meet a lot of athletes, especially at the higher levels. And my dad always asked me, like, "Oh, do you think this guy is taking something?" And after a while, first years, I'm like, I really don't think so. But as you get to know athletes and coaches, you kind of hear, like, you understand that most people at a high level are on some sort of supplement or regimen, whether it's banned or not, to get them to that level. And it's really, I think people have to know this is understood when you're watching some of these sports, like that's what it is, especially at this competitive level.
Sure. And when it's your profession, when you're making your living off of it and you're not making much, you will do what you have to do. And now there's another point that really needs to be made here. When you have your average TV viewer who's watching the Olympics right now, they really don't understand what it requires to do what these people are doing. They don't have the same mindset as do elite level athletes who live, die, and breathe their sport every single day. And it's a part of their identity, and it's a big part of their identity. And to be taken away from that, either because of injury or a lack of performance, or it's time to retire, can often be very, very traumatic for these particular people. And it's something that most folks can't really empathize with, because most folks don't do exercise in our country. It's true. Most people just do not exercise, period. And if they do, then they're weekend warriors, but they're doing it at a level that's still enjoyable. And that's what they should do. But that's not the same thing as an obsession. And that's what most of these athletes are. They are absolutely obsessed with what it is they do because they love it. It's part of who they are. And so they will do almost anything to maintain that level of participation within their chosen profession. And keep in mind, most of these folks are going to be retiring from what it is that they've found to do for their lives in their 20s, maybe 30s. That's the vast majority. A few may trickle on to their 40s, but most of us are not going to see that. And so think of yourself in your current job. I mean, this is what you do. This is what you have a passion for. I do the same thing with my job with Wiley. I have a passion for what it is that I do as an editor-in-chief. But I can do that till I'm 100. That's not going to get taken away from me because of an injury. But if it got taken away from me today, I'd be pretty depressed about it. So try to think about that. And I'll give you one example of what, and this is the most recent one I can think of. Think of Tom Brady. Tom Brady was not ready to retire, so he went to Tampa Bay, and he won a Super Bowl right off the bat. He's played one more year that was and then his last year when he retired and then came back, I mean, from all accounts, that cost him his marriage and his family. That's how important it was for him to have one more season of going 8-9 and then getting trampled in the first round of the playoffs. He just had to get it out of his system. That's not something that I could empathize with my wife. I would never jeopardize our marriage and say, look, I got to play one more year or do one more year of this. If she really wanted me to retire, I'd find something else to do. But that's what I'm talking about. That's a different mindset than everybody else has. So when you look at an athlete who's found to have been taking a doping substance or method or one of the illicit drugs that don't perform or have any performance enhancing attributes whatsoever, you say, how could you possibly think of doing that? Well, you're thinking in your mindset as an average human, not as an elite athlete. They're different people and they have different motivations, and their threshold of what they would consider to be ethical or unethical is different than ours.
And that's always fascinates me, because I hate to tell a lot of my younger athletes, they're high schoolers, like if they're not, let's say on the right supplements, or football players, I'm always telling them, hey, like you probably should be supplementing with creatine and some other stuff, because there's a high level of people out there that are already doing that from a young age. Like they're already behind on the supplement list. Now we never recommend anything like illegal, but knowing it's done out there. And over the years, I mean, you saw in the 90s, like steroids, anabolic steroids, like testosterone was big. We've come into a whole new realm of performance enhancement drugs. A lot of people hear it and they'll hear PEDs and they'll just think, oh, that person's on steroids. But we're in a whole realm of different anabolic drugs, recovery drugs, heart rate drugs that people are taking to get a performance effect or recovery effect that's just changing the game of sports completely. What have you, over the years, have you seen with that, or just kind of like your thoughts on that? Because steroids, we'll get to that. They're still used a lot, but not in really sports.
Oh, I don't know what I would say that they're definitely still being used regularly in sports. All sorts of steroids. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about supplements, or are we talking about performance enhancing drugs specifically?
We'll go performance enhancing.
Do I think that people are still doing these things? Certainly. There's no question in my mind. And we can get that from, the best place to get that is going to be from survey data, anonymous survey data from athletes. That's the only way to get reasonable data. Anything that you ask anecdotally of somebody that could potentially be on the record, they're not going to risk being banned. They're not going to tell you the truth, and neither would I, and neither would anybody. So if you give them an opportunity to answer these questions anonymously, we've seen this already. There are a number of different published studies that are about this. The two that I cite regularly they were both in track and field. One was at the Pan Asian Games, another one was at a World Championships. And they ranged between 30 and 50% of the athletes who said, yes, I am now or have in the past taken performance-enhancing substances or used performance-enhancing methods that are banned. So if you have a third to a half of your athletes who are admitting to it, that's still conservative. There's still going to be athletes, even in an anonymous survey, who are not going to trust it. So let's extrapolate that a bit. Let's say that the minimum is half. That tells you all you need to know, that this is still being done. The vast majority of the time, it's going to be for the purposes of recovery, and they're not going to be taking these things for competition. So if you take steroids, anabolic steroids, you're not going to be taking that during a competition because it's not going to benefit you in any way. It takes a while for them to ramp up in terms of their anabolic effects, the recovery effects. You're going to be taking these during training. So that's why, WADA way back when extended testing to out of competition time as well. But when it comes, you kind of mentioned here younger athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's still in their formative stages where they're still growing. So for females, they usually top out around 20. For males, they can continue their growth process into their early 20s. I would not want anybody tinkering around with hormones at a time when they're still in their developmental phase, because they're mucking with a system that you can't possibly understand. And you're not going to be getting these steroids likely from a licensed physician who's actually checking up on you on a regular basis. You're going to be getting it somewhere black market. You really don't know what it is you're putting in your system. So on those lines alone, I don't want anybody doing them, but certainly not kids. And so when it comes to talking to younger athletes about what it is that they should do, sometimes I will recommend a couple of supplements that have actually been tested and that we know have particular benefits. Creatine is really one of the only ones that you can put out there. The rest of the supplements that are out there, you got to remember, the FDA does not regulate these in any way. There's very few studies that are done on supplements that are really meaningful because they're really shaky. And if you look at the ingredient list on a supplement bottle, particularly ones that are advertised to be working, what they'll often do is they'll put on there that there's a proprietary blend, which means that you're not really finding out what it is that's in that ingredient list that's an active ingredient. Could very well be a performance-enhancing drug that they're spiking into that. There's also the problem with these supplements in as much as, since they are not regulated by the FDA, you don't know where they're being formulated. You don't know what else is being mixed in that particular lab. It could be other types of drugs. This happens all the time, where you have contamination of a supplement, or it's not even contamination. It's just that the manufacturers add in something to make it work that's actually illegal, and an athlete pops. So I try to keep my athletes away from taking supplements as much as I possibly can. And we manipulate their diet to make sure that they're getting in all the nutrients that they need in order for the purposes of recovery and performance.
Though that's when you've always heard, especially in the college kids, that they've been taking this supplement and all of a sudden they pop positive for a test. And because as coaches and trainers, we're always very aware of what we're putting into our body. So I would always be like, hey, if most people are aware of that, if they're a high level athlete, like I played in college and I was aware of what I put in, but you can always see how with those blends, like you said, or if coaches like, hey, just take this, you get that pressure from coaches or other people, and you really don't know what's in this.
Well, none of us knows what's in these things,
right,
unless we go have them tested independently from a lab. Just the fact that you look at a label and say, this is what's in it, that's not necessarily what's in it. So we have a certain amount of trust that we're putting in the manufacturer telling us what it is that we're putting in our body. But because I read it and think I know it, doesn't mean I know it. And so that's my primary reason to keep people away from supplements in general, except for the one or two that I know very well because I know the manufacturers and they have been tested, and they've also been tested in terms of their performance enhancing capabilities. Creatine is really the standout alone that does anything. But by and large, these things are placebo effect at best.
Mm-hmm. And with a lot of the performance enhancers over the years, I feel like let's say whatever drug companies, whoever's making them, they try to make these certain ones that they don't get popped on tests. And I've throughout my years, and this is later, I've met other coaches and trainers that have tried some stuff like SARMs and the IGF that are different methods. Now, a lot of them, they were doing it for a size effect. They were just looking to get big, maybe not be athletic performance. But in your kind of findings, what are your thoughts on those? As like, I know what they were going to be based off recovery, and I think it was Ray Lewis was back in 2012. He got caught taking, was it I believe it was some sort of IGF for his tricep recovery.
What do I think of these? So SARMs have not been approved by the FDA, and there's not a major nation in the world that's actually approved these for treatment of anything yet. So I would always tell my athletes to stay away from them. But the mechanism of action for a SARM is that it effectively acts like an anabolic steroid. It's a chemical with a similar structure that's going to bind to an androgen receptor and trigger its response in the same way that an endogenous or exogenous anabolic steroid would. The benefit to them is that they have no androgenic properties. So let's define these two things. Anabolism means that you're going to make your muscles bigger. If you have an androgen, then that's going to give you these secondary sex characteristics that you would see happening during puberty. So in men, we have facial hair, we have an Adam's apple, we have a deepening of the voice, we have growth of hair in other places in our body. Women have similar things. They get pubic hair, they have armpit hair, but they don't get these other things because they don't have as much testosterone. And so for a long time, when you would take testosterone, you would get hair growth in places that you didn't want it. The SARMs eliminate that part and they just give you the anabolism. So that's what they're there for. But since they have not been approved by the FDA, and none of them, you're really doing some serious guinea pig work there as you're doing that. With IGF-1, so this is insulin growth factor or insulin-like growth factor 1, it does a lot of things that are similar to growth hormone. They have very similar properties. And what you're going for there when you take these particular drugs is not necessarily anabolism of the muscles, because you can get that with your steroids. But the problem with taking these steroids is that they make the muscles grow fast, way faster than the connective tissues can keep up. And the ones that we're most interested in here are really going to be the tendons. To some degree, ligaments, but really the tendons. So what attaches the muscle to the bone? They are not nearly as well vascularized. In other words, they don't have nearly as much blood flow as do muscles. So as the muscles grow huge fast, the tendons can't keep up, and then you get a strain. And so and those things take forever to heal. Most of the time, they're going to require some form of surgery or some sort of pharmaceutical assistance. So when Ray Lewis, I don't remember this specifically, but you're telling me he popped for IGF-1, I'm not surprised by that. A lot of athletes will take their steroids in conjunction with growth hormone for the purposes of preventing these types of strains from happening. And then when they do, they'll take them for the purposes of trying to heal them up. That's specifically what I wrote about in my book when it came to Andy Pettit, when he popped 2 times. Well, he never actually popped. He just admitted to the fact that he took human growth hormone. So he had a tendon tear initially in his pitching arm in 2002. Tried to heal it up with a little bit of HGH, didn't work. In 2004, it completely ruptured and he had to have surgery. But under those circumstances, I mean, what he was trying to do, just like with Ray Lewis, is to heal an injury that was preventing him from getting on the playing field. That's not in my book. That's not performance enhancement. That is treatment of an injury for the purposes of going to work the next day, just like anyone else who worked in an office would do if they had, a bad back, a bad knee, a bad anything. They would get a cortisone injection, maybe. They would get a taper pack of prednisolone. They would get something to alleviate the pain and try to hasten the recovery process so they could get back to work. No different.
And is that where the book kind of title comes from? That, hey, we're more looking at this recovery aspect. And that's really, I mean, I think you go back, what was it? The Bulgarians, their Olympic weightlifting program from back in the day was insane. Mm-hmm. But they were testing. They had to ability to recover. They were using doping mechanisms to recover, to be able to do that much volume per day. And it was fascinating. If you look at it on paper, you're like, holy smokes. So did that kind of stem where this, hey, in defense of doping, recovery, there's a spot for it?
Sure. The book really takes a number of different approaches to answer the question why I'm in favor of doping. I'm not really in favor of doping when it comes to the purposes of trying to make athletes stronger, better, faster. The first thing that I talk about is having some sense of empathy for an athlete who gets caught doping. Instead, what we tend to do is just bludgeon them to death and then send them to the waste pile of history and never speak of them again. The reality is that the vast majority of athletes who are trying to make a living from sport come from generational poverty. They have very little education. If we bring them into college, if they're in the top 3 sports of football, basketball, and even baseball, we tend to funnel them off to the easy degrees, which are really useless once they get out if they actually graduate. So their earning capacity is entirely tied to this sport. And let's say that, they're trying to, now with NIL, they see their quarterback is making $1 million a year and they're still living off of ramen noodles. They're going to do what they have to do to survive. There's been a number of studies that show that the NCAA athletes, a lot of them, if not the majority, I think it is actually the majority, live under the poverty line. That's obscene in a system where billions of dollars are being made off their backs. So when it comes to us saying, oh, that kid popped positive, get rid of him. That's just inhumane to me. So that's a big part of where I go with the first part of the book is talking about just, think about yourself and what you would do in their circumstance. Would you really say no to a drug that was going to make it so that you can make some more money to send home to your family who's poor and has been poor your whole life, I wouldn't. I'd take the drug like that. And I have no shame in saying that. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to dope my athletes, because I don't, but that's what I would do under those circumstances. The second part of the book really does go down this idea of recovery. We've all heard the idea, and we've all heard the saying from people who are critics of doping, that that's just a shortcut. You're taking the easy way out. Well, that's exactly the opposite of what doping actually allows for. As you're saying, what doping really allows you to do is recover between workouts. Now, what does this mean? Let's say we put in a really hellish workout on a Monday. Our body at the end of that is depleted of glycogen stores. To some degree, it's depleted of amino acids that were in our muscles. Okay, we have a certain amount of fat that was removed. We have a bunch of carbon dioxide and lactic acid that is now in our blood that needs to be removed. And then we have to restore our glycogen stores and also get some more protein back into our system so that we can rebuild the damage that we've done. Because what we're getting from a workout is a certain level of anabolic damage or catabolic damage. We're tearing things down. What we want between these workouts is to recover completely so that we can go hard again. Because it's every one of those sessions that makes you go hard, you get a super compensation coming off your recovery to make you stronger, better, and faster than you were before. When you take steroids, you're making it so the distance between these two workouts is shortened, and that the amount of work that you can do in your workouts has increased. So where do we find this out? Unfortunately, we got this information from when the Berlin Wall fell, and we looked at what the East Germans were doing with their swimmers and track athletes in particular. They're females. Now, they doped everybody, but they were going to get a bigger bang for their buck from the females because obviously they don't have as much testosterone as do males already. So their females just did incredible at 2 Olympics in a row. And then in 90, 91, 92, after the wall had fallen and we started to see these open records coming out, we could see what they were actually getting out of what they were taking, which was oral Turinabol. They were able to increase their total volume of workout from when before they were taking it and compared to other nations, particularly the United States, by 10 to 15%. That is a massive number in terms of how much you can actually get done. Okay, so steroids are not a shortcut. To the contrary, you're going to be doing more work at a higher intensity for a longer period of time if you're on steroids during these training phases than if you're not taking. I'm not suggesting that this is ethical or anything else, but let's just get rid of that misnomer that this is a shortcut. It's actually the long way home. Okay, so it makes it so it's much tougher. So that's the second point, is just pointing that out, that everything when it comes to doping is really predicated modern times on recovery. Then the last two phases of the book, we're really talking about, one, how drugs that are illicit, namely marijuana, are on the list of banned substances. And an athlete like Sha'Carri Richardson was banned from the last Olympics because she tested positive after winning her 100-meter dash at the Olympic trials. That's preposterous. There is no performance-enhancing benefit from marijuana whatsoever. The reason that WADA banned this initially was because they call these drugs of abuse. And effectively what they're saying is athletes should be held to a higher standard of ethical behavior and not use these drugs. Now, I've never understood why smoking, eating, or drinking the extract of a plant that grows on every single continent in this planet except for Antarctica has anything to do with ethics. What does that have to do with anything related to ethics or morals? So my argument right off the bat is that that's just nonsense. They came back around and they said, well, there are some performance-enhancing benefits to smoking marijuana, and namely, it makes it so that you can focus better.
Oh,
that's
a far reach, in my opinion.
It's ridiculous. I'm not sure if you've ever consumed, and I'm not going to ask. I have, and I do. I can assure you that I cannot possibly perform at my highest level when I've eaten a gummy at 5 o'clock in the evening and I'm laying down watching TV. It's just not going to happen. It's nonsense.
Yeah, I couldn't.
So there was that part.
I couldn't even imagine trying to get in a squat rack and do what I do, or like I'm like no. But
I mean, I could squat, but I can't do my best.
Oh, yeah. Close. I mean, it's completely the opposite of what something like caffeine, or I want to call it like a pre-workout, is going to do, right? It's not going to give you that effect. And I've always wondered, like, the NCAA has its ban list, so does WADA. There's always some things on there are very interesting. Like in the NCAA, there is caffeines on the list, and it's, I mean, yes, I think they might have changed it, but for when I played, it was on the list, and they're like, "Oh, just be careful, you don't have so much." It's like, really?
Yeah, that was a WADA thing, because WADA took it off in 2003 because they had the same thing going there.
I was like,
And
okay,
the amount that you could have in your body would be basically what you would get out of a venti black coffee at Starbucks. So it became
crazy.
just a joke. You can't manage this. So they took it off.
Yeah, it's like 2 grams. I was like, I mean, but of course, you know, when I played, there's still athletes that were taking all the pre-workouts back in the day were 300-400 milligrams. Now, granted, we weren't being tested, but we all kind of knew as athletes, like, hey, we wanted to get a competitive edge. And for the recovery part, it's the same thing. Like, I still do it today. I try to find the best supplements that I can take to recover, to increase my strength and the ability to come in the next day and hit a hard workout. I think most people in this industry, this world, are looking for that. You see all the biohackers do the same exact thing.
Everybody wants to have an edge over their competitor, or they want to have an edge over what they've currently or previously done. They want to do better than what they've previously done. But this does not stay in athletics.
Looking for personalized workout plans? Whether you prefer to train at home or hit the gym, try a 14-day free trial of the Think Fitness Life mobile app. Get customized workouts, nutrition guidance, and coaching from a qualified professional who will be in your corner every step of the way. Visit www.thinkfitnesslife.com to start your free trial today. That's www.thinkfitnesslife.com.
That same mentality permeates all elements of life. And so at the end of my book, I talk about how all of us use performance-enhancing drugs of some form or another. And the example that I give are symphony musicians. So symphony musicians have their own, I'm not sure if it's a union, but it's certainly an organization, kind of like the NSCA. And so this organization will regularly send out surveys about certain things. In this case, they were asking people who are part of this organization whether or not they have ever or are currently taking beta blockers. Now, a beta blocker is a drug that you take typically if you have high blood pressure that will block the beta receptor for adrenaline on your heart. Okay, so if we have a fight or flight response or we're working out, then we get a release of adrenaline from our adrenal glands that will go through our circulatory system and a number of different places within the body, but certainly within the heart as well. Binds to the beta receptors and it makes the heart beat faster, but just as importantly, it makes it beat harder. Okay, so contractility goes up. A beta blocker is going to reduce the impact of adrenaline on the heart. So why would a symphony musician take this? If your heart is beating really fast, it's very difficult to hold your hands still as you're trying to play an instrument or shoot a gun. Okay, so this has also been something else that we've seen within biathlon athletes and shooting athletes.
Yep.
All right, so the percentage of musicians who have admitted to taking at some point or currently beta blockers, 71%.
Oh, man.
Clearly, that is a performance-enhancing drug.
Right.
And so when I tell this to my friends who were skeptical about my book, and I understand that, I would tell them this, and they're like, yeah, but that's not a competition. They're like, you clearly don't understand the world of symphony music.
Of course it is.
Each one of the groups of musicians that has their own instruments, so there's a number of different chairs. So violin is the biggest one. In a big symphony, the biggest one they'll have 2 sections. So there's the first violins and there's the second violins. And each one of those is ranked first chair, second chair, third chair, fourth chair. So I went through and I looked because each one of these is a nonprofit organization and you can look them up on ProPublica in terms of what their tax returns were. And you can find the salaries for the different musicians. Ooh. The ones that are in the first seat make a lot more than those are in the second, third, and fourth. And it's a precipitous drop off after that. And there are regular competitions for those seats every year, every 2 years. So to suggest for a moment that this is not a competition is nonsense. It absolutely is. So let's get away from the area of competition. Let's just go into other stuff where we would want a performance-enhancing benefit. When I was a college professor for 15 years, I didn't see this until towards the end of my career, I think because people started getting more brazen about it. But I would have study sessions for my classes. These were meant for my DFC students, but who always shows up? Your A and B students, because those are the obsessive ones who really want to get the best grade, and that's fine too. The last year I was doing this, we had a study session. I had some of my best students in there, and one of them popped out an orange prescription bottle, gave it a quick shake. I don't know why they always do that. Cracked open the cap, popped a pill, and I just sat there quietly watching, and then slowly, offered up to everybody else. What is that? What do you think it was?
Adderall or Ritalin?
Adderall. Adderall.
Yep.
And I was like, you're handing out a prescription to other students in my class. I can't have this. And he's like, oh, dude, we do this all the time. I'm like, why do you do it? I can focus better, And I've never taken Ritalin or Adderall, but I've heard amazing things about it. But what I did was I made a little survey, anonymous survey, and I handed it out to all of my classes. And if they didn't want to participate, they didn't have to. But from what I got back, it was around half had or were currently taking Ritalin, and only 2 of it would have been like 70 students who replied to it, had a prescription. Everybody else was just getting it from a friend who still had a prescription because they needed it in the past, but weren't taking it anymore because they could make more money off of just selling it at $5 a pop. So everybody is doing this. Everybody is doing this. So why do we reserve this judgment about what is fair and unfair strictly for athletes? And I think the reason is that there is a history of athletes doing this under the table with very little supervision from a medical professional, and they get injured, they get killed, they get really sick. That's really where this issue comes in. So what do we do? The same thing that we typically do throughout history is we see this thing that's not going well and we ban it. This will never happen again. Well, making something illegal doesn't make it go away. It just makes it more dangerous.
Yeah.
So now athletes are still doing the same thing. They're being much safer about it because we haven't seen athletes dropping off the blocks right and left. But it's not going to change. So really what I'm advocating for is to have some sense of ownership by the athletes to make their own decisions as to what they do and do not want to do. And where this changes is with having athlete unions. Now, where I go into this in the book is I look at the punishments that are handed out by WADA on the international scene. It's steadily increased now to the point where in many instances, a first offense is a 4-year ban because they're trying to make sure that you miss one Olympic cycle.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the reason for it going from 2 to 4. That means for the majority of these athletes that's the end of their career. Okay. Now let's contrast that with what happens in our domestic league. So we're talking about the NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and hockey. Their punishments are significantly less. So the NFL, the first offense is a 4-game ban. The second one is usually going to be an 8-game ban, and then you also have to go get some treatment in classes for, don't do this again. Here's what else you could do. The third third offense is typically going to be a year ban, and then thereafter they'll kick you out for life. But there's a progressive increase as you go through. Why does the NFL have a different viewpoint than does WADA? My interpretation of this is because the NFL has an NFLPA, an NFL Players Association, who negotiates with the ownership and management of the NFL whenever their collective bargaining agreement comes back around, and they can negotiate for salary, they can negotiate for time off, and they can negotiate for what will and will not be on their banned substances list and what the punishments will be. They have a level of ownership of what they're doing to themselves, what they will accept in terms of what the risks that they're willing to take. And because they're considered a collective, they are in this along with the ownership, that they can negotiate a lot of things from this. If the ownership wants to have 1 more or 2 more drugs taken away from me, okay, give me more money, give me more time off, give me a better pension plan at the end. International athletes have 0 representation, nothing. If the management of what's now called World Athletics, which was the IAAF track and field, says that they want to, have all of these particular substances on there and they want to increase the ban to 6 years, they can do it. So it's not necessarily me advocating for athletes to be able to do whatever the hell they want. That's not the point. The point is to let the athletes choose for themselves. Now, I was asked in another pod, what would you say if athletes finally got a union and they chose to have everything as is? They're going to keep all the bans in place. That's their choice.
Yeah.
I'm an outsider. If that's what they want to do, all the more power to them. But now they have they have at least some power to make these decisions for themselves. And currently that's not how it runs.
Right. And especially at the world scene, like I work with a lot of figure skaters. That's really my thing. So a couple of years ago when Russia, they went through that whole scandal and really nothing came out of it. Mm-hmm. It's sort of like you have these, they'll cut down and be strict in organizations in the US, and in the world, they're kind of like, oh, well, we kind of maybe know our athletes are doping in certain countries. If they get caught and really like they'll go through investigation stuff, but you see a lot of it like, hey, they're still going to compete at Olympics and they're still going to be allowed to do certain things. As I don't know whether it's countries, coaches, they kind of finagle that system to be like, hey, well, it was a mistake or something. You do see that a lot. And it's unfortunate for certain athletes. And I don't know, like for the figure skate, like that was a 15-year-old female. Like that's not even ethical. Like that's ridiculous. But to the point where these coaches from certain countries, they will do anything for that win. And
yeah, it's when it comes to, so you're talking about Russia.
Yes.
And then shortly thereafter, the documentary Icarus came out.
Yep.
And if any of your listeners haven't seen this, it's on Netflix. I highly recommend you sit down and watch it. It's absolutely fascinating. A tremendous production value and a fascinating story. And then most recently, we had this news that the Chinese swimmers, 21 of them tested positive for a drug before the 2021 Olympics. Nothing happened. Why is it that they get away with this stuff, but Americans get hammered? The reason why is real clear. Americans, and not just us, other countries as well, that are more, well, they are democracies. We actually test our athletes and held them accountable for what it is that they do. In these other countries, Russia, China now, I would also put in there North Korea, any one of these that has a totalitarian dictatorship in place, they are not going to be held accountable. So I don't know that it's necessarily the coaches. The coaches are doing their job. They're doing what they're being told. And if they don't do their job, they're going to be going to some gulag and breaking rocks for the rest of their life. So I'm with you that it is coming from the coaches because they're the ones who know what to give them to get the performance. It's coming from Putin. Putin is telling them do this, or I'm going to put you over in Siberia. Why is it that WADA is so beholden to these countries? Well, let me tell you why. When you want to have an Olympic Games done right, you're going to go to a communist nation or a totalitarian dictatorship because they have no group of representatives that they have to get through. There's no committees. There's one guy who says, do it and do it this way and do it now. And it gets done on time. It gets done right. And the Olympic Committee makes a ton of money. That's exactly
got it.
Okay. When a games comes to our country or France, they have to go through a whole committee. They have to go through the legislation within the nation, within the state, within the municipality to get all these things done. It takes forever. There's all this red tape that the IOC doesn't have to jump through. So they just squawk about that. So this, I can prove this. This is not just speculation. I can prove it in the actions that happened just in the last month. Okay, so you just saw that the IOC awarded Salt Lake City the 2024. No, it's 34
yeah.
Winter Olympics. Okay. So the IOC comes in there and there has already been, there's legislation that we're trying to pass in the United States to investigate what it is that China did in terms of how the IOC allowed them to just get away with it. Because WADA is run by the IOC.
Yeah.
Okay. The International Olympic Committee. Okay. So now you have all these legislators that are in Utah for the awarding of Salt Lake City for the Olympic Games. Before they would actually allow for this to occur, they made all of the representatives that were there from the U.S. sign off on a promise to kill the legislation to investigate the thing with China and to drop it dead. And as soon as they signed off on a promise to do that, then they awarded us the Olympics. There was I watch pardon the interruption all the time. And one of their favorite sayings that's from someone else. It's not them directly, but the answer to all your friends, the answer to all your questions, my friend, is money. That's what it comes down to. These other totalitarian dictatorships in these communist countries, they provide a hell of a lot more money directly to the IOC. And I would expect probably some backdoor channels as well to make things run a certain way. And therein lies where I have the biggest problem of all, is because obviously they don't really give a shit, excuse my French, about who is or is not doping. They care about who's going to bring in the most money.
Yeah, and I think when you go back to the American sports, right? Does the NFL really want to put some of these big name players out for a year? Now they have which great, they have their union, but the NFL knows that they can't. At the time, they couldn't sit Tom Brady for more than 4 games for some air pressure. Like they ultimately they need him kind of there. But it was when that came out, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? But the IOC, I just said, okay, I've always held the Olympics as like the gold standard. The IOC is gold standard. I'm like, well, I guess it's pretty much like fair game. Like, let's open these channels up. You're gonna kind of see this going back to, I hate to say, probably like the 80s, where Russia was really dominating and they had their programs. If you can't question it, like, have at it.
Yeah. Well, to their credit, they have banned Russia, not because of anything related to doping, but because of what's going on in Ukraine. So there's where we, and I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be banned, because I do not agree with the war in Ukraine. I'm fine with that. There are still some Russian athletes who are there, but they were required to have never advocated for the war in Ukraine, and they're not they can't compete under the Russian flag. They compete under the IOC's flag. So yes, that's exactly right. And when we think about the Olympics, that is what we think of. We think of initially we thought of amateurism. That went by the wayside in '92 when we had the Dream Team finally, and it should have, because what we want is the best athletes to be there. But it's really a gigantic money-making venture for a very small elite number of European aristocrats who make all this money and don't give anything back to the athletes themselves, who are the product. Now, real quick, what is sport in general? What is it? It's entertainment. We tune in to be entertained. Now, it's different than going to a concert or going to a movie, because I have an emotional investment in my team and I want them to win. But it is still, at the end of the day, entertainment. Now, you said that the NFL does not want to lose their marquee players. Of course they don't. If the congressional hearings on steroids in baseball had not happened, the NFL would be much more lax with what it is that they would require their athletes to do and not do, because they know it's being done for a reason. It's improving the product on the field. Yeah. End of story.
And I mean I love the steroid era in baseball. Like, I miss those days. I mean,
I did too.
They were entertaining. There were pitchers on them, batters on it. Like, it was just
no question.
That gets me to my next kind of question, because I'm excited for this. Next year they have the enhanced games. So now they're going to let this just go. And I've always been like, hey, if you want to let athletes dope and go for it, let's see what turns out. Like, I'm kind of excited for this, to see what these athletes are going to do. No, people think like, oh, someone's just going to go on crazy amounts of steroids. Like, no, they're going to do this thing right to get the best advantage possible from a recovery standpoint, performance. And I look forward to it. But what do you think about it?
So I have spoken with the organizers of the enhanced games on a number of occasions. We were trying to get on a pod together, myself and Aaron D'Souza. We have not figured it out just yet, but I'm hoping
you got to do it.
I hope so. They're the person who was just assigned or just awarded or hired to be their athlete safety chairperson. He sent me an email and asked me to give him my top 10 list of performance enhancing drugs, their benefits, their drawbacks. And so, of course, I assisted as much as I could. I think it's a very novel concept. I think that I think it's going to be a little bit too early yet to get any big time athletes to come over from the other side, do their games and go back. I think it's going to be very difficult to recruit anybody. Technically, it's possible, because if you have a washout period, then they won't be on these PEDs any longer. I'm curious to see what they get and who they get. The one thing that I was a little concerned about was they've got one big time swimmer, Magnus somebody rather, from Australia. And what he said was he's going to be doing something PED wise, but he's also going to be wearing some of the band suits that they had back in the 2010s. Oh, that kind of now you're muddying the water in terms of is it performance enhancing drugs, or is it the equipment, or is it both? We're not going to know. So I wish that they would just stick straight to the PEDs.
I agree
that part. But here's what they're going to do instead. They're not going to test for PEDs. What they're going to do is they're going to test for the athlete's health parameters. That's something that's not even done now on the international scene. There's no doctors at the IOC or World Aquatics, World Athletics, who's regularly checking the athletes to see if they're healthy. What these guys are going to do is not test for the PEDs, but to test all sorts of physiological parameters to make sure that their athletes are healthy and can compete. Now, what they're going to do if they're not turn out to be not healthy, I don't know yet. But I think it's certainly a novel concept, and it's going to have an impact. The impact that it's already had, and this is the part that I'm really, really enthusiastic about. And I think Aaron D'Souza did a great job with this. They're offering $50,000 for a gold medal, and $1 million for every world record that's being broken. Okay. The IOC pays no one for winning. Nothing. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to come from them. It has to come from their governing body. But no governing bodies at the Olympics pay anybody for anything. If an American wins a medal when they come back, they have to pay taxes on it.
That's right. Crazy.
So right after they said this, World Athletics and one of the international boxing commissions said that they were going to offer a cash prize for a gold medal. That would not have happened if it were not for the enhanced games. Yeah. So in terms of athlete advocacy, that is a good thing.
And you might even see, like, just because you have this enhanced games, someone might not be like enhanced, but they say, I want to win money. I want to go compete. Sure. It's just what, like you said, it's entertainment. Once you put money to it, now these athletes, which, and I totally get, like, athletes want to try to make a living with what time frame they have as athletes. Like, sure, let them make money, because if not, I mean, that's a hard grind when they're making minimal and they're working every 4 years to try to make it to the Olympic cycle. Like, it's kind of unfair. I'm totally for it, and I can't wait to see that.
Sure. You know, we are the only major industrialized nation that does not have a sports ministry. We don't have any government money going to our American athletes for the Olympics. All that comes from corporate sponsorships. Now, I don't know what kind of an appetite there's going to be for my tax dollars to go to funding athletes. I would pay for it, but I wouldn't necessarily expect anybody else to be all that excited about it. But that said, you know, it's not just the fact that they have to train as hard as they do and then work a part-time job or a full-time job and then also go and compete. But if it were me and I'm the product on the field and I see everybody who's organizing them making every penny of the money that's coming from this, I go back to Jerry Maguire. Show me the money. Exactly. What am I doing this for? I'm the one they're watching, not you. You know, all you crusty old Europeans who are running the IOC, they don't give a damn what you're doing. They want to see me, so pay me. I mean, anybody would say that. And that's really what I find so remarkably offensive is the way that we take advantage of our athletes. You know, it's not something that is sustainable for an extended period of time. And it's certainly not the American way, in as much as it's completely unfair. There's nothing fair about that. So when we talk about the fairness of a level playing field, it starts with compensation. So give these guys their pay, and maybe they'll negotiate away some of their rights to take certain drugs. Those are going to be something that they would have to talk about amongst themselves, obviously, but they have to have a say.
Yeah, I agree totally. And kind of before wrapping up a little bit, I know I'm taking about an hour of your time here, which I do appreciate it.
Oh, it's wonderful.
With this new world of, let's call it, hormone replacement therapy, TRT, you hear a lot of people, this becomes more table talk. And I kind of like it, because beforehand, people would always be like, oh my gosh, steroids, like
whispered.
Exactly. Yeah. And now you have like men in their 40s plus, and they're like, hey, I'm going on TRT. Or you hear famous people like, hey, I went on TRT. A lot of ex-military people go on TRT because of their plummeted levels, because of whatever things that they were exposed to. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because it's like, this is opening the realm of health to be expanded for people who are older.
I've been on testosterone for over 10 years. I had testicular cancer in 98. When my wife and I got married in 2010, my remaining functional testicle just gave out. It was done. It had been doing double duty for a very long time. And so we wanted to have a kid. Initially, I had to go on HCG because I had to keep my sperm count up. We did that through a miscarriage. And so this is an injection every other day for the better part of 2 years with an insurance didn't cover it. So when I had the opportunity to switch off of that and just go into a single injection a week, I made my switch. And it was a remarkable change in my life. I slept better. My mood was better. Obviously, the libido was up. Recovery was better. All those things improved. And, you know, we talk about, you mentioned all men who are doing this, and that was the case before. The population that's increasing the most right now is females.
Yeah, I have a female client on it.
Sure, they take a much lower dosage than do we, but I mean, females obviously they still have testosterone in the system, just much less than we do, and they need it for the same reasons that guys do: recovery from workouts, sleep better, perform better in the job. but also libido. They need it for their libido. And so why would you want to, starting at the age of around 40, for the rest of your appreciable life, which for our average lifespan in the United States is going to be another 38 to 40 years, have terrible sex life, have terrible sleep, be flabby? Who the hell wants to live through that? So, of course, we're going to go and get these things done. Now, for a long time, it's like, well, I don't know what that's going to do to your body. The long-term research that's been done now says that people live longer, better, and happier if they have these hormones. So this is a corollary to what we're talking about with sport. It starts over here with sport, and then it bleeds out into the rest of the community. Yep. All of us are going to do the same thing when it comes to trying to feel better, perform better, and just live better. It's no surprise that athletes are the ones who started this. It's just not.
Right. Well, one of my female clients came to me the other day, like you just said, whisper, like, oh, I'm on testosterone. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, how do you feel? She's like, I feel great. I'm doing biking. I'm running. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm like, you need that. But it's never, and I'm glad you mentioned females, because a lot of times females, like, they don't want to, like, oh, well, they're on testosterone. They're not going to get qualities. Right. Yeah. And a lot of times with TRT and depending on the person's, whatever their levels are, like the dosage might not be as high as I always refer to, like back, in the 90s and the early 2000s, like when people are bodybuilders, like they're high dosing. Like
those are super physiological levels.
Yeah.
Those are 5 to 10 times, maybe 20 times the amount that you would normally get in your body. I'm taking a physiological level of testosterone. So it's between the normative values that you would normally see for these drugs or these hormones in most people. I'm not going above that level. And it still has that same benefit. Let me throw in one more thing for the females. Not so much on the guy's side, but certainly for females. Once they get past menopause, bone mineral density plummets. And they get into the position where they're going to be risking fractures. What the testosterone does, one, I mean, it helps with that, but it's not a direct impact. It's an indirect impact. It allows them to do more weight-bearing activities, which is the stimulus that increases bone mineral density. So, if you have somebody who just can't get up and get moving, or they're afraid to do weights, the amount of testosterone they're going to do is not going to bulk them up. It is going to allow them to actually lift those weights, put more stress and strain load on their bones to increase their density and reduce the risk of those fractures later in life. It's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. Unless there is a contraindication that they can't take these drugs, I would shop around until I find the doctor who's going to treat me appropriately and safely and get me to where I want to be.
100. And I'm so glad in the last, I'd probably say 15 years, that this has become more mainstream. Because I remember years ago when I started, I had a client, it was about his father. Oh, what should he go on, testosterone or HGH? And I was like, look, I'm not really the person to ask at that point. But now it's just, you go, hey, I want to go on TRT. You can get all this replacement therapy, and people are feeling good. Because at the end of the day, really, like, it's not illegal. It's not a bad thing if you're doing it in the right dosage.
Yeah. You're going to be monitored by a doctor who's going to make sure that you're staying safe and healthy.
No. And it really comes down to, you see it a lot with the young bodybuilders, and there's a big on Instagram. I'm 100%, you probably seen it with, trend's pretty big, and they're throwing around these diabol trend, like these words, like people are attracted to it, but have to understand, like, you have to, if you want to do it, like, I can't tell people no. You got to tell them their side effects and potential harms, because they do exist. But if you want to go do it, like, I know people who are on it, like, they go to a doctor and make sure they get their blood work done.
Well, that's
like spot on. They're not just like, hey, I got this. And I know people who've done it, like, they're just doing it out of their freezer. And I'm like, holy hell. Like, that's crazy. Well, but you hear people do it.
That action would be illegal, because these are controlled substances.
Oh, well, so, it was.
The first thing I would say is be careful.
It was.
You don't want to be popped for this by the cops. But beyond that, I mean, in terms of the health ramifications, I don't want to get my drugs that I'm taking from the dude in the gym. I want to get it from my doctor in the white coat who I go to every 6 months.
And I think it's pretty good to say that if someone is interested, like TRT or something, like, you got to go to a doctor. Don't go to some.
And it's not hard to find.
No.
A Google search will get you 20 clinics within a 5-mile radius of your house, no matter where you live. So, I mean, don't be lazy about it. Just go get a doctor.
Yeah. So kind of wrapping up here, anything else you want to kind of touch on here?
I want to I'd like to plug my book, and you can find that on Amazon. That's where I self-publish through. And you can also go to my website, which is goodegg.fitness. So it's goodegg.fitness. I've got all my pods that I've ever been on there. This one will go on there as soon as it's published. And all my books are there. The next book I'm going to write about is going to be the science of trans women in sports.
Oh, when is this going to come out?
Probably in February. I've just started the process of writing it. I've already done all the research, and so let me just plug real quick. Mm-hmm. I want everybody to be involved in sport, but you can't displace females with biological males. You can't do that. It's not fair.
I'll look forward to that, because from people asking that question, it's a physiological question. Like,
oh, absolutely.
That's where it gets into the weeds. And I love talking about that. And people, it's hard for people to wrap their brains around that. Like you and I don't understand about the physiological performance of mitochondria and cell function that can change everything. But we'll look forward to that. Well, it's a pleasure having you on. Great talking to you.
If you're ever interested in getting me back for any of my other books or any other topic, just reach out. Let's chat.
Cool. Sounds good. So I'll hit end.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.